the Chief Staff Officer at the New York Office of Cannabis Management. So delighted to hand over the floor to you, Lucas.
Thanks, Arundhati. Appreciate the invitation as well. I'd like to welcome the panelists to join the stage. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to moderate today's panel, in which we will have the opportunity to compare and contrast New York's emerging cannabis market to some of the more mature markets like Washington and California. With me today, we have Adriana Hemmens from Chorus Compliance, a regulatory software. She's from the marketing department, and Axel Bernabe from the OCM. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Lucas.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great. So I'd like to go over to Axel and just start off there. New York put up some very aggressive timelines for opening up the state's first cannabis retail dispensaries, and of course for selling New York's first legal, regulated, and safe cannabis products before the end of this year. Are you able to comment if New York is on track to open its first stores before 2023? What kind of products do you expect to be available? You know, I'm sure we're looking at dried flower and pre-rolls, but could New York consumers expect to see cannabis extracts or infused edibles and beverages on the shelves?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that, Lucas. I mean, in a nutshell, I want to just maybe take a step back and say and explain a little how we got here. So it's a little bit of an unconventional approach to a market rollout. You know, we were fortunate enough to be the 15th state in the US to legalize. So we came in after a lot of folks have already given it a shot and did all the heavy lifting, quite frankly. You know, California started before everybody else. So by the time it got to us, we'd already been given a bit of a roadmap. We'd also been told a little bit about some of the challenges. And one of the biggest challenges was the ability to roll out social equity as a general concept, and really to give licenses and give an opportunity to folks that had been disproportionately impacted by the prohibition of cannabis in the past. And that's been a challenge because it's both identifying who those candidates are, it's finding metrics to score and license them, and then assistance to getting them out into the market. So conversely to most other states that started with more well-funded and well-capitalized entities that were already participating in the medical program, we sort of inverted that a little bit and led the charge with smaller farmers and then with social equity conditional retailers. And so the reason I bring that up in terms of timing is what we really have by the end of the year is the foundation of a legal market. There will be sales, but it won't be the full scope and scale of the program as it develops over 2023. It won't be the full scope and scale of the products that will be allowed and that are permitted under the draft regulations that we published. So, so we did start with about 200, and I think we've awarded 272 farmer licenses, but those have been probably largely outside growers. So that's also been a priority from a sustainability standpoint. So, right, you won't get necessarily your most premium flower or your most appealing flower from a consumer standpoint, although some would argue that sun-grown outdoor flower is actually better. But so there's a lot of that. We have processors that have been licensed as well. So we do expect a number of infused products across the range, from concentrates to pre-rolls to gummies to all sorts of vapes. So those will be arriving as well. And then our dispensaries are opening. We're also allowing delivery very quickly. So there's a bunch of pieces to this. But yeah, the timing, Lucas, is on track. And I think the supply chain is unique in that it really is small, sustainable farmers matching up with social equity dispensaries. So we're quite happy about that.
I think considering the timelines for the rollout, if we compare and contrast another emerging market that's just next door in the tri-state area, New Jersey, I think, there's certainly a hat tipping that's should be done to New York in terms of the velocity at which this foundation has been created. So I think if folks didn't see their first retail transactions happen before the new year, I'm sure they would have some sort of patience and allowance relative to what we've seen in other emerging markets. Adriana, over to you. I know you're an expert in a lot of the products that we've been seeing move in other jurisdictions, mature markets like California. What would you say the kinds of products are that consumers are mostly buying in California? You know, is dried flower and the pre-roll category still a winner?
Well, it is, yes. And I want to say first, thank you to Axel for putting together his thoughts on the social equity program in New York. And I have a lot of hope that it will be successful and maybe achieve outcomes in places where the California program did not. It's a little bit different than New York, just because we have social equity programs are coming from local jurisdictions. And there's many examples of areas where it fell short. One example that I can share is with my hometown here in Los Angeles. One of the requirements to secure a license was that they had secured the property first, which sort of put people in a loophole who were, likely to be low income, disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. They would, borrow money in order to secure property and then end up not with a license. So now they're more in debt, basically continuing a cycle of poverty. So that's just one example, but there's many others. So I'm happy to see New York putting a lot of thought into how their program will be different. But going back to your question, Lucas, about the product types, flower still is the biggest seller in California, and edibles are the fastest growing. I think hearing those last two presentations from Robin and from Mike, and a lot of the emphasis on the wellness consumer, it's really a very important category to pay attention to. The wellness consumer is one that's growing fast. They are likely to be shopping in the legal market. They don't necessarily feel comfortable shopping in dispensaries. They need a lot of education. The wellness consumer is really a huge driver of growth for the category overall.
That's great, Adrienne. I appreciate your comment on that. I think that's very interesting. As a chemist, I had a very fond appreciation for the last presentation, seeing a lot of the chemicals that we do become inherently exposed to if combusting cannabis products or tobacco products for that matter. Having access to non-combustible THC or CBD products or other minor cannabinoid products, I think, are extremely important, especially for those that are shopping in the medical markets that may be using a medical document to acquire access to these products. So having that option is certainly important from a health perspective too. Also, on the chemistry perspective, going back to New York, with what we're seeing with a proposed THC tax, is this something that could potentially help to avoid the lab shopping that has happened in other more mature markets, Axel?
That's an interesting question. I mean, that's not the primary purpose, although we are concerned, we certainly are concerned about the lab shopping, but to the extent that folks are shopping to get a higher THC read, then having a tax that increases as the level of THC increases could create a disincentive for them to do that. The tax is really aimed at seeing if we can, it's first and foremost simplifying, although it is kind of complicated to roll out, simplifying tax collection at the wholesale level, like alcohol, and the federal government here in the US has been interested in that because they do, there is conversation to take a federal piece of the tax before it gets taxed at the state level and local level. So there could be an unintended benefit of that, but it wasn't the primary driver.
Okay, and then Adriana, what are you seeing in terms of the whole lab shopping situation in California? Is this still a ubiquitous problem that mature markets are dealing with?
Yeah, and I think it's sort of a twofold problem, which we're seeing a lot of class action lawsuits against companies here in California. Jeter is one of them. They were overinflating on their labels how much THC content was actually in the product and got busted by some lab testing. The parent company of course, compliance is SC Labs, which is one of the first testing facilities in the US. And part of their mission is to educate consumers that THC content is not the most important thing to look at to predict what kind of experience you'll have or what benefits you'll experience. So part of that mission is helping people look at other qualities like the terpene profiles and other cannabinoid content. So I'm hopeful that consumers will start to catch on and we won't have this sort of double-edged sword of constant lab shopping to get the results we want because there's the consumer demand on the other side asking for it. Breaking the cycle.
I think Adrienne is right. It's got to be driven from that side of the equation. I think there's also a role for government. We have an association. Actually, the Canada participates in sort of as a participant, not a member, is the National Regulators Association, and we share best practices. And I think the consensus is that the problem in the lab sector is that we lack method validation standards, frankly, and that not everybody's on the same page. Well, mainly because we're all developing them as we go along. And so I think once we standardize those methods and we implement them, and that's another role, I think, from our perspective, that the feds could play if they enter this space properly, to start to get everybody on the same page. I think that should reduce the lab shopping. Right now, a lot of states don't have a reference lab that can validate those methods, and so it allows people to use whatever they want to say whether there is a certain potency or analyte in the product.
Certainly, as a chemist, I could speak to that all day. I really do enjoy a great conversation about analytical instrumentation. I guess from that perspective, then too, certainly from the requirements for the cannabis laboratories in New York, I think there's some great elements there that encourage those, or if not require, that they do have ISO level certification, 17025 for laboratories, which is fantastic, and certainly something we haven't seen in some other jurisdictions like Canada. In which the analytical labs that are licensed for cannabis are not at all audited and have very little requirements for those that are, in fact, actually operating them. On the analytical testing piece and the education piece is the topic of minor cannabinoids as they come up, and sometimes even synthetic cannabinoids as that becomes another driving issue. Where's New York currently sitting on the Delta 8 THC perspective? Is this something that could fall under the OCM's regulatory reach? Will we see Delta 8 products being sold at retail dispensaries in the future?
Yeah, so another good one, Lucas, that's a very hot topic at the National Regulators Association. So, proliferation of those products is ubiquitous, including by mail. We came out early on cannabinoids. We do have it at the OCM. So the Office of Cannabis Management, per our cannabis law, actually centralized everything cannabis related except for industrial purposes of hemp. So the moment you plant a hemp plant for the purposes of human consumption, it falls within our purview, and we follow it all the way through extraction, product, and we have probably some of the most comprehensive rules on cannabinoid hemp products. We actually implement a registration system for retailers that sell cannabinoid products. We have distributor permits. We have testing requirements that are very similar to the adult use ones. Enforcement is coming a little bit behind it because our agency is just sort of born. We're at about 150 employees, but that's only over the last year. So that enforcement is going to be picking up. And with respect to Delta, any synthetic or isomerized, if that's a word, isomerization derived cannabinoid, we came out early and changed our regs and made it clear that they're prohibited under our hemp, our cannabinoid hemp. So Delta 8, Delta 9 derived from isomerization or synthetic or however you want to call it, we just stopped it. In our hemp cannabinoid program, technically it could be sold in our adult use program, but since we're still rolling that out, we're looking to a lot of other states that have a lot more work in this space, but it's becoming very difficult to identify the basis for distinction. And so I think the general propensity is to just ban them and have naturally derived Delta 9 products. You just also have, a THCO, you have Delta 10, you have just too many other derivatives that we just don't know enough what the possible contaminants and side effects and of the isomerization process. So we're not too keen on those right now, and we've taken a preventative approach, a precautionary approach, and banned them altogether.
Yeah, Axel, that's great. Just a small point there. Isomerization is definitely a word, so you use it correctly there, 100%. Adrienne, over to you. Same question. Delta 8, where is that sitting in terms of California regulations? Is this still a product that's ubiquitous at smoke shops? And where's the DCC sitting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the reason why we have more of an issue with Delta 8 in states where it's harder to get your hands on Delta 9 is because there are people who are willing to cut corners to get high, and there are people who are willing to cut corners to bring products to market that are not safe and not tested. I see it as more of a problem of bad actors than of the actual like compound itself. But that's, you know, an issue with that other cannabinoids can get involved in too. I think with consumers are really interested, putting on my market research hat for a minute, consumers are really interested in exploring new benefits, but they're also wary of what the impact will be. And that's because we do see a lot of these news articles about Delta 8. I think if it's like manufactured safely, it could be a viable option for people. But again, it's the actors that are operating in the gray area that tend to be the bigger threat.
Yeah, we're not. Sorry, we're not, you know, convinced that there's been enough science on that. You know, that there's some worrying trends that we're seeing out of the public health sector through that process, the process of isomerization. That it isn't at all clear to us that it is, you know, harmless. So that's really where we're coming from. The actors, I agree, because they're not regulated, but from a public health standpoint, we do caution against its use. And you know, there are now plenty of other alternatives and modalities that you can experiment with to try to get the relief you're looking for. So, yeah, just wanted to
and those should be available hopefully within the next couple of weeks in the state of New York as well, which is fantastic. Continuing on the lab testing trend, one thing that I noticed when reading through the Seeding Opportunity Initiative from Hochul was that hemp farmers licensed in the state of New York prior to 22 would be the ones that would be supplying New York's legal regulated cannabis market. Hemp farmers in New York are largely those that are growing outdoor, I think some greenhouse as well, as far as I understand. And then in the association with any kind of outdoor agricultural is the proliferation of compounds such as mold, yeast, and bacteria. Considering the thankfully, you know, very strict lab testing regulations, you know, we did see some criteria there for mold, bacteria, and yeast in the requirements for what's going to be sold, and at least as far as it's concerned for dried flower. Do you have maybe a comment you can make there, Axel, about how we can perhaps combine sustainable farming practices, such as, you know, with living soils or outdoor practices, with some of the very strict and, in my opinion, very safe testing requirements for these products, especially as it pertains to what medical patients might be using?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, Lucas. I mean, I am probably not the person to opine on that because it is a very scientific question, and we have folks on our team that are significantly better versed on that. But big picture, from our agency standpoint, you know, we've all been consuming and smoking, in particular, I guess, outdoor grown flower for a very long time, and every step we're taking on lab testing is going to be a significant improvement from a soil perspective, from a pesticide perspective, from a bunch of other contaminants perspective. So we're very proud and happy about that. But once you get to outdoor total yeast and mold, there are definitely different approaches on the East Coast and the West Coast. The West Coast has a long history of outdoor grow, and so total yeast and mold is handled differently than on the indoor East Coast grows. And quite frankly, you know, people get, I think, caught up in total yeast and mold as a catch-all category, supposing that if you relax the total yeast and mold standard, you're actually not going after any molds or any other, you know, bacteria. There are specific species, Aspergillus in particular, that often folks talk about that are targeted. So we have several subspecies that are specifically called out that have to be tested for. So you're going after known contaminants and known molds that are worrisome. But what you also have to do is balance exactly what you said: the need for sustainable grown cannabis for affordable, for environmentally sustainable products. So I think we've learned a lot from the West Coast on that. There will always be room for improvement here, further refining, further research. Part of the problem of having this substance be illegal for as long as it has is that we just haven't done the research on it. And so I'm sure that there'll be more evolution on this, but the approach we took was precautionary on total yeast and mold. You still have to report it. So we didn't do away with it like some of the West Coast states in terms of a metric. You report it, and if we find that it really exceeds all sort of reasonableness, we will come and inspect it. We'll ask you to pull it and then retest by different batches. So that's the middle ground we picked here.
In terms of growing style, one that's been ubiquitously popular in places such as Canada, where outdoor cultivation is limited to one season and usually a single harvest per year, is the movement of the cultivation practices happening indoor, where cultivation styles such as aeroponics and hydroponics, albeit certainly less sustainable and much more energy heavy in terms of their use and operation, can potentially lead to lower bacterial counts because of the lack of the use of soil and having products of decomposition around the plants. There's certainly the challenge there, though, that it makes cannabis one of the least sustainable farming practices in the world. Adriana, I'm just wondering if you could comment on the kinds of cultivation sites that we're seeing in mature markets like California, and what is happening, I guess, there in terms of folks being able to satisfy yeast and mold counts, and what are some of the alternatives, I guess, that folks can look to if they're not hitting those marks?
Super good question. I am not a chemist, so I can't speak to the chemical composition of the plant or what we can expect in yeast and mold levels. But I can say that I think it's really interesting what's happening in the California market. There was a satellite study done by the LA Times where they went out and measured the size of illegal growing operations, and it's double the size of what the legal market is producing, enough to fuel the whole entire state of California and then some. So competing against the illicit market is a big struggle. And I think that a policy like the one that Axel just described, that's more friendly to farmers and establishes a relationship of trust so that we can help bring them over to the legal market, is a good policy. And yes, they'll be refining it as we go, but as a starting point to begin this relationship and say, welcome to the fold, please operate legally, I think it's a good first step.
Sure, and sorry, maybe I should rephrase. I'm not necessarily saying, in terms of chemical remediation, but, in California, would you say that the bulk of the cultivation facilities are still largely indoor?
The legal market, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
what are you seeing on the illicit side? Are a lot of these illicit operations operating as outdoor cultivation sites?
Yeah, they're almost double the size, both in terms of what they're producing and the size, like the square footage.
Okay, well, I guess to Axel's point, the reason they can probably do so is because of the sustainability of outdoor growing. Mm-hmm. Although we are very familiar that folks in the illicit market probably pay very little mind to, any kind of analytical testing regulations. Some of the criteria in Canada, for example, when it comes to those testing requirements, have been challenging to satisfy as well. And what a lot of licensed producers, as we call them, have had to turn to remediation methods such as irradiation, which is really similar to microwaving. That leads to products that can sometimes be very dry, odorless, and in many cases tasteless, and causes other minor products such as terpenes and even flavonoids to evaporate in many cases. That leads to, for example, folks going onto social media and spouting out how they feel that government weed is just not the same quality as what they've been getting illicitly. And I know in places like California, there have certainly been, a large ongoing battle with the illicit market to keep that in check. So Axel, I'm curious, what are some of the measures that New York is looking to do to help to combat not just the illicit growers that are in the state of New York, but also some of those illicit smoke shops that are also still operating and selling unregulated, untested Delta 9 or even Delta 8 products?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we're focused on that. We're thankfully we don't have the same rich history of legacy growing that the West Coast states do. We have our legacy growers that grow very good strains. So wouldn't want to leave you with the impression that we have we don't have good cannabis in New York in the Northeast. There are two, but we have a smaller pool of legacy growers than we do of legacy dispensaries, because we are predominantly a consumer state in that way. And on the grow side, we've actually done a fair amount of outreach as part of our social equity initiative. We really have reached out to the legacy communities. We've been extraordinarily open to conversations, to identifying legacy growers, to helping explain to them how our program works, what compliance looks like. We just launched and are about to announce winners to our mentorship program, which is a program designed to bring folks that have experience growing cannabis or farming into compliance, or learn about the MRT, the cannabis law, and compliant farming and growing of cannabis. So that's going to be part of our effort to bring them in. On the dispensary side, we're a little less forgiving, because the stores that you're discussing are pop-up stores that really came out since the legalization. Most of them are not run by legacy distributors or dealers. These are opportunists that effectively came in prior to us really starting our enforcement efforts, and before our ability to issue these licenses, because we were being so intentional on who we were giving these licenses to, and took advantage of that. So we've sent out cease and desist. We've made it very clear that this is not a licensed entity. We've made it clear that there are more licenses coming. We've started to issue those licenses, but some people just insist on selling illicitly and undermining our social equity dispensary. So we have ramped up our crackdown very significantly, and that the new year is going to further that ramp up. So if folks are selling illicitly, they should be mindful that we will be coming into the store, seizing all their products, and to their financial detriment, and fining them and shutting them down. So that's going to be taken care of in earnest in the new year, as we roll out our new dispensary. So folks will have an opportunity to go somewhere legal instead of turning to these. And an interesting study was recently done by our medical MSOs that really did a pretty thorough testing of some of the products that were being sold at these pop-up locations. And the level, speaking of testing, the level of untested and contaminated product that was actually being sold at these stores is very worrisome from a public health standpoint. So highly recommend avoiding those stores as soon as we launch our new stores.
That's excellent context. I appreciate you sharing that with us. You mentioned fines and other compliance and enforcement action for those. If someone were to be fined at a smoke shop, would that make them ineligible for applying for a retail dispensary license later on down the road?
Absolutely. Even without the fine, if we send you a cease and desist letter and you do not cease and desist, then any application, and we do pretty thorough background checks on folks that we're about to investigate. And so we do know, who the owners are and who's investing in, and you will not get a license if you continue with the conduct. So we're going to be pretty harsh on that.
That's really great context. We have received a number of phone calls in our office, I would say on a daily basis, sometimes several times a day, for applicants or prospective applicants that are looking to get a license to be able to sell from the back of a truck. Is that a kind of license that the OCM is considering awarding?
No, it's not. But I want one before I talk about that really quickly. I think one of from a market structure and rollout standpoint, one of the only silver linings to have taken a little bit of time to ramp up our enforcement is that you get a sense for any future market that's going to go legal. You get a sense of how quickly folks will exploit the loophole and pop up, and you also get a sense of what it means, for those folks that say, why is the government in the business of handing out licenses? And there's a chorus of folks that say, just open it up, get the government out of the business of licensing. Well, you got to make a decision at the beginning as a government regulator, right? You now see what happens in New York. So if you open up the market, everybody will participate, but there is no way that anybody is going to, that the majority of these folks are going to survive. So the folks that will survive will be the folks with the deepest pockets that will wait out others losing money, and then we'll roll it up. And that who knows how long that could take, 3 to 5 years. maybe. So the point is, the moment you decide that you want to do something to assist social equity, the moment you think that that you want to do a public health strategy where you don't flood the market, and you want these businesses to have a chance, you have to start awarding licenses, and you have to do so in an intentional, deliberate way. And I think this is proof of it, how quickly it can turn. So we're going to put that genie back in the bottle very quickly in the new year. But I think it serves as a good lesson and an important takeaway for just how, it won't be a measured, slow rollout. Everybody thinks they can be a millionaire. Everybody rushes into the market. But no, the back of the truck, we're not doing ice cream truck. We just announced our delivery guidance. What we are allowing you to do is, I think we put it at 50%. You have to leave the store, your warehouse, with 50% of your product accounted for in pre-purchased. As you're driving and delivering that product, we will allow you to take in new orders and deliver those orders as they're made from the home base. So it's a hybrid, but you're not stopping. You're not selling from the car, from the back of the truck. You have to have a destination. You have to have a prepaid order. And
ID checks, I presume, would be happening throughout this process.
I'm sorry, say that again, Luke.
ID checks, I presume, would be happening with the end buyer.
Oh, 100%. We have a series. You have all your traditional manifests. You have a GPS location. You have ID checking. There are several other security measures that are listed. The one innovation, because we're dealing in particular with New York City, which is a very competitive market when it comes to delivery, we are relaxing some of the prohibitions in other states on requiring a vehicle. We're allowing bicycle, scooters, pedestrians with locked boxes or locked bags to make the journey. We're capping how much product you can have, no cash, that kind of stuff. So we're taking security measures, but we're trying to innovate a little bit and learn from other states and what they've done.
In reading through the retail dispensary guidance document that was released last month, it mentioned that motorized and unmotorized vehicles must be owned and insured by the retail dispensary operator. Would that mean that if I'm a delivery driver, that they should be providing me with a bicycle that is both registered and insured?
That's what the language of the guidance says. We're rolling this out to be successful. So we're going to be talking, folks, and if there are tweaks that need to be made, or if there are things that we haven't noticed, we'll be flexible and we'll work with them. But we don't want a gig economy kind of rollout, right? We want people to be employees. We want people to be insured. We're looking to have good unionized jobs. That's a big push under the cannabis law. So we're going to roll out that way. This is a temporary 12-month delivery license while you're setting up your brick and mortar. It's really to expedite and turn the market on as quickly as possible. So we'll allow some flexibility as we roll it out, and we'll have lessons learned as we get comments back from our regulations. So this can change, but right now, the language says that, and that's what we're kind of rolling out with.
Perfect. Adriana, in terms of the Weed on Wheels format, what are some of the initiatives that California has put in place? Are we seeing Uber Eats flock to that market?
I love that you just said weed on wheels. I feel like we need to trademark that immediately. And I'm just sitting here imagining an onboarding package where you get a free new bicycle when you take on your delivery job. So I can't really speak to what the policy is with bicycles, but I can say that we've updated in California our policy about delivery recently. It used to be that required to have 2 people in the car at all times making deliveries for safety and security, which of course greatly impacted the margins that delivery operators could expect to earn. They've dropped that requirement. I think that that's a good move. I think that we're also adjusting our policies as we go, even though we are a pretty mature market comparatively.
I guess in terms of the distributor license, which is much more of a B2B version of that delivery license, are unmotorized vehicles permitted for those that are just looking to do distribution between, let's say, cannabis processors and retail dispensaries or on-site consumption lounges?
Is that a question for me or Axel?
Sorry, that's Axel. Apologies, Adriana.
No worries.
Yeah, no, so far, will they be in the future? If we get comments on those regs, that's something we could consider. It's not now because the guidance really deals with B2C, not B2B. But I don't know. I guess we'd want to hear from folks as to whether they really need to do that. I'm hoping that distributors are shipping a little bit more than bike sized deliveries to our retailers. I mean, this is going to be a fairly big market, so I'm hoping there's a bit better logistics on that, but we'll wait to hear from folks on the comment period. But right now, that's not contemplated because it's B2C only.
One of the licenses that I think I'm most interested in learning a lot more about is the processor manufacturer license. In reading through the regulations that were out this month, it was clear that there's a certain level of adherence to good manufacturing practices that would be required. Axel, I'm just curious if you could comment on the different, compliance levels that those in that space would have to achieve, and how, variable folks with that license type really could be in terms of the kinds of sites that would be operational, compliant with that license type.
Yeah, so the way we did it with our cannabinoids before our adult use was to go with the federal standards for food safety and dietary supplement safety under the federal rules. And so we've actually directly incorporated by reference those standards. That would make some of the products that are manufactured that are closest to dietary supplements like pills really follow CGMP practices under the federal rules, which are acknowledged, fairly rigorous. The question, I think, from a manufacturing standard perspective is, what are you manufacturing? The beauty of cannabis when it comes to manufacturing, as with so many other things, including sustainability and growing, I mean, it touches so many regulatory areas. That's why I like it so much. Is that you're making so many different types of products. You're making, clear edibles and beverages that are food, although the USDA and the FDA would not want to consider them foods, but are clearly made and consumed as foods. But you're also making pre-rolls that are like tobacco and vapes that are like nothing else we've seen, as well as other drugs that are more like dietary, or drugs or other products that are more like dietary supplements. So depending on what your product is and what it's characterized as, it will dictate what standard you're going to be applying. You may apply food standards, which in New York can be as relaxed as clean kitchens, what we call 20C kitchens, which are a lot more affordable. So if you're making a form of edibles that's akin to food, you're not going to have that stringent you won't have the dietary supplement system apply. So there's a bit of flexibility there, but we are going with some pretty rigorous GMP standards, just because we find that those have been done in the dietary supplement industry, and anybody who's manufacturing at scale really needs to be hitting those milestones. So that's sort of how we approached it in New York.
When we were speaking on Monday, you had made references to clean kitchens for a lot of these edible manufacturing plants. That would be effectively what you'd be looking at in sort of the restaurant industry, something more akin to that.
To what? I made reference to what? I missed that word.
Clean kitchens.
Right, that's the clean kitchen. That was the reference, exactly. So if you are making a food product, something that would qualify as a food product, you would be following the sort of clean kitchen 21 FCR 117, I believe, rather than 111. So I always get them confused. One is the dietary supplement, one's the food. So that there are different standards depending on what it is that you're making. And so we'll have to get on the same page on what product fits in what category and what it is that you're making. But if you're making vapes, we're going to be asking for that heightened standard.
Okay, fantastic. Adriana, I guess same question to you. What do a lot of these sites look like? And what are some of the tools for compliance that a lot of these folks are using to make sure that they're staying on the right side of compliance actions?
Well, I can tell you manufacturing is not my area of expertise, but we do have a similar system in California where it is it's following the GMP, the same federal standards. California, which might be some helpful context for this conversation, designates different types of manufacturing, ones that involve solvents, ones that don't involve solvents, and then there's the type N, which is just infusion only, and those follow the food safety standards. The details of what that actually looks like, the manufacturing process, I'll leave that to the experts to explain.
Sure. I mean, we've certainly had an interesting year, I guess, or interesting couple of years in terms of a lot of the external market factors that we've seen, pandemics, near world wars. I'm curious, with your involvement with the DCC and your involvement with a lot of other folks who are operating licensed entities, how have some of these economic factors affected compliance level in terms of, buying fines and doing audits?
My involvement is really through the capacity of Chorus Compliance, which is a software tool that helps operators maintain compliance, document their records, stay on top of changing regulations. And through that, what I can tell you is that it's a huge challenge, even just knowing what's changed and then generating new standard operating procedures based on that, and then communicating it back to your employees. The more locations you have, the more complex it is. So I think for the cannabis industry in general, particularly in the US, being able to scale a business is really dependent on having those streamlined processes in place. What we're seeing is that I think because we're in an economic downturn right now, legislators are turning to levying fines as a way to make up for tax revenue that might be lost. So that's just another example of why we're going to see more crackdowns, more surprise inspections, more surprise audits moving forward.
Would you say now that DCC can regularly inspect all their license holders annually, or are you seeing that these inspections are happening less frequently?
I think we're going to start to see them happening more frequently, not just in California, but across the whole United States. There's been people in Michigan who are saying we're going to crack down. Basically, across the board, we're seeing more of an intensification of that.
Oh, it looks like we've lost Axel's video. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I just got a call. I'm unfortunately going to need to wrap this up a little sooner than expected. So, but happy to stay on for a couple more minutes, but something just kind of blew up in the office. But so yeah, sorry to distract, but let's keep going for a couple more minutes if you have a couple more questions, and then
Oh, absolutely. And speaking to New York regulations, I'd certainly be happy to speak all day and provide comments and really learn about what this process is going to look like. Axel, one of the reoccurring themes that sort of come up are that these regulations are in a draft phase right now, and that if folks do have concerns or maybe some suggestions on what the future could look like in New York, how can they submit those for comment?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Lucas. I mean, we really took some sort of bold initiatives in our regs. From a sustainability standpoint, we put a lot of stuff in, very, very, very detailed data tracking, HVAC, lighting requirements. We went really far down the rabbit hole there, and as an example, and mainly that's because we're looking to elicit feedback. So we figure it's easier to put stuff in there to really get folks thinking about very specific issues. Sometimes when you put regs out that are very high level, you get high level comments and it doesn't help in implementation of a program. There are a lot of moving pieces to implementing this program, which again makes it very exciting, but we need specifics. And so there's a lot of stuff on environment. There's a lot of stuff on the market architecture. We have a lot of questions about the role of platforms. That's something, we haven't talked about, but both B2B and B2C platforms, their role, how do they impact small businesses? How do they impact brands and small brands' ability to get to market? So we have a 2-tier market. So there are a lot of regs that we put out. So warning folks that, those are actually being officially filed today. And so a 60-day comment period begins. And if you look at our website, there is a link, and I can't remember if it's regulations@ocm.ny.gov. I think that's the email, or it's OCM regulations. It's safer to check on our website, which is Office of Cannabis Management, New York. If you Google that, you'll find it, and you'll have 60 days to submit those comments. Then we'll take a bit of time to go through all those, and we'll be responding to all of them. So that's the timeline, and we really encourage folks to participate in that process because we don't have all the answers.
That's fantastic, and I really appreciate your openness to entertain a lot of my comments and questions about and my interpretation of the regulations. So hats off there. In terms of when the applications do open up to the broader public, and we're not just looking at the conditional licenses, or we see conversions from the conditional to the annual licenses for cultivators or retail dispensary operators, there are a lot of folks on the outside currently that haven't been eligible to apply yet that are very excited to get into, New York's regulated market. What are some of the things, in your opinion, Axel, that some of these would-be prospective applicants can do now to prepare for when the applications do open up to the broader public?
That's a good one, Lucas. I mean, first, the only delay has been starting with a equity-centered focus and then getting the regs out. So commenting on the regs is the first thing. The regs do highlight all the license types, and there's a lot there. We have a micro license, and how do you feel about 3,500 square feet of indoor grow, or 10,000 of outdoor grow, selling your own brands, a cap on how much you can process, the ability to sell at different locations than the one that you're manufacturing at, the fact that you could have on-site as a sistered up sort of entity, that makes the micro an interesting license that should be looked at. I think familiarizing yourself as to what license you want to participate in, remembering we have a two-tier system. So if you're thinking of being a grower and manufacturer, you won't be selling at retail, right? We have an alcohol model. And so that's a really good thing, because as a brand, you'll actually be able to access a bunch of independent retailers and not be tied in and competing with only verticals that are really locking up the retail space and your ability to get to market. There was actually a really very interesting Crane's Business article out of Michigan that talked about the consolidation of the verticals in Michigan and the inability of small brands to get to market because retail was getting locked up that way. So we really want to get to the bottom of that data to understand. But I think we have a very interesting approach to it. So understanding the market approach, understanding the license type, commenting on those. As soon as those are final, we're opening up our licensing, and that means we're opening it up across the board for all licenses. So, and understanding the licensing process, understanding what'll be required of you. We're not looking to make it onerous. We don't need you to have a lease. We learned again from California on that, as Adriana was saying earlier on. We want to make it as simple as possible to apply, but there will probably be some processes to identify where you come from and prioritize you under certain conditions. But I think that's the step right now, is just understanding the market, understanding the regulations, and being ready to go by the middle of next year.
I think New York has potentially poised itself to be one of the more progressive, if not the most progressive, and potentially sustainable cannabis markets in the U.S. Once the conditional licenses have been awarded to card applicants, will we continue to see a prioritization for social equity applicants once the applications open up to the broader public?
Sure. The exact mechanism that'll take, Lucas, is not entirely figured out yet. Again, getting feedback from folks. We have a social equity plan that's supposed to come out. We've had tremendous stakeholder engagement, roundtables, gotten feedback from the community on that. So that'll dictate a lot of the criteria and the ways we roll it out. But yes, the goal of the cannabis law still is to shoot for about 50% of our licenses to be social equity, which is broadly defined to include distressed farmers, veterans, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. So it's a broad category, but we are still very much focused on making sure that we try to launch an equitable business. And then licenses, there are going to be a lot of licenses, so they'll turn, and there'll be people opportunity to get in afterwards with purchasing a license and getting in that way as well.
A lot of those folks that will be opening up the first New York facilities, retail dispensary stores, or even acquiring delivery licenses are very excited about the fact that they're going to have a significant amount of runway to really establish themselves in the market before the doors open up to MSOs or multi-state operators. How much time do they have before New York will open up the doors, and can they remain shut forever?
Yeah, so I think what you're talking about is, our medical providers, like we were saying, that were previously grandfathered in other states. Right now, the regulations put out a proposal of sort of 3 years from the first sale, which will happen before the end of the year. So if you time that, really by the time the middle of the year, you're not looking at full 3 years. I think the original dispensaries are going to need some time to get up and running. So I think that was the purpose of the regulation and the board's adoption of that provision. The exact time will be defined when the final regulations come in, and it really just the time it takes to get other dispensaries up and going and everybody getting up and going. I think in the end, it won't be a huge lead time, but it will allow folks to find locations, folks to sort of build out and be able to compete. Because let's remember, some of these MSOs are going to have the option to be vertically integrated. So whereas we have a two-tier market for everybody else, some of these MSOs are going to be able to actually sell directly through their stores. So that's going to be, helpful on a 280E perspective. It's going to be helpful with their own branding. So, there are a number of benefits there. And so, waiting a little bit to launch those benefits is, I think, what was intended with that delay in launch. But yeah. So unfortunately, I am going to run. I'm so sorry to leave 10 minutes early here. I think I've done too much talking anyway. So I think Adriana should weigh in on some of these issues as well, Lucas. And my apologies. It's just there's always something happening, and here I just need to get back to folks. So thank you very much for the time here and the very good questions, very insightful questions, frankly. And look forward to circling back with everyone here and hearing from folks in our regs.
Thank you, Axel. And absolutely,
Thanks, Axel.
Adriana, we're going to start with our hard-hitting questions, and unfortunately, you're the only one left here. So
I know. I'm sorry. I know we had left 10 minutes at the end for this. 9 minutes. I'm leaving 9 minutes early, so apologies for that. But
appreciate it, Axel. We'll be sure to make sure to let everyone know about how to comment on the proposed regulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Adriana, I'm just curious, going back to the conversation surrounding social equity, are you able to comment on what California has done, if anything, to open up the doors to potential social equity applicants, or did they entirely miss the boat?
Well, I think you could find a lot of examples of success or non-success on both sides. I think one thing that sort of enables the existing companies to stay in business is because of our vertical integration. But that also opens up the door to operators in the state who might not necessarily be profitable. And I think a lot of people are staying here because they think that there's a brand recognition to being from California because of our extension of having a strong cannabis culture in the state. And also because I think they feel that they'll be well poised when the walls come down, when federal legalization actually happens, that they will be in the best position to compete because it is so competitive here. So I think because of all those interests and very well organized, well-heeled, companies operate here, it's really been stacked against the social equity applicants.
Also, you are a very data-driven person by nature. I know that you are someone who's quite tactical and sort of a get things done kind of person. Having said that, I know I'm sure you've seen a wealth of challenges for folks working in the California sector, as well as other sectors as well. I believe you mentioned Colorado and others. What other states are you currently active in?
So I've worked with clients across the U.S. Right now, currently, the brand that I'm working for, Chorus Compliance, is available in Colorado and California for retailers. And we have very aggressive expansion plans in 2023. So coming to a state near you very soon.
It's fantastic. We were also discussing about some of the lessons learned that perhaps could be incorporated into, emerging markets such as New York and hopefully soon Missouri and Maryland. What do you think some of those lessons learned could be from jurisdictions like California, even Colorado?
Well, I think for, an emerging market like what we have, we'll start to see more consolidation. So it's kind of tricky, right, how regulations can kind of stand in the way of that. But it also has the other side benefit of protecting smaller businesses that might not be able to survive otherwise. This is something that we were talking about before. I remember, Lucas, what's the regulatory landscape? Is it friendly to small operators, or does it just create a situation where only big operators can exist? And I think that we'll start to see maybe almost like a rolling back of those permissive plans, just because we know that there's a value in having craft growers and craft manufacturers for a healthy marketplace.
It's fantastic. I think it'd be really valuable for you to let us know a little bit about Chorus Compliance, what it is, how did it get started, and how did it find its place, I guess, in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, so we were born out of SC Labs, which was one of the first cannabis testing facilities in the US, and working with clients who were manufacturers and cultivators and seeing their struggle with compliance, being able to maintain their business practices, day-to-day operations, while also having to stay on top of ever-changing regulations was just a huge burden. And Chorus fills that gap by helping you streamline your compliance process while also staying on top of regulatory updates. And it was born out of that need. And I think that will definitely prove its value as more people start to adopt it. They'll see the benefit of being able to do things more efficiently in a streamlined way and a compliant way.
You had mentioned that there was some pretty aggressive plans for Chorus compliance to expand in the future. Is New York one of those markets in which Chorus compliance is looking to move? And
fingers crossed, I would love to be in the New York market.
And then having said that, are there any others that are in your sights?
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunity too in sort of the Midwest region, Michigan, Illinois. Those are places where we could definitely make a huge impact. Our goal is really just to go wherever we can have the biggest impact on operators in that state and partner with them in the most meaningful ways.
Okay, would that include New Jersey or not?
Maybe, we'll see. I'll come back next year and give you the rest of the plan.
That's fantastic. Just letting panelists know as we reset, or panelists, attendees know as we're resetting the room here as well, getting ready for our next panel. If there are any questions you have for Adriana or anyone else that is in the chat, feel free to ask them. One question has come up from a David Fader. Please clarify this section under the community facility info, a center or facility where the primary purpose of which is to, sorry, chat moved, is to provide recreational opportunities or services to children or adolescents. I mean, my initial interpretation of that is any community facility or after school program, care facility that is intended for folks under the age of 21 to provide some kind of service or recreational activity. I'm not sure if there's anything else that you're looking for or some broader interpretation there, David, but if there is, feel free to drop that in. Adriana, any comment on that one?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the example that David mentioned. Sorry, David.
Great. I certainly know the YMCA offers some after school programs for children, daycares, or even other community facilities. But again, that's in the definition there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have any examples of that.
I guess one of the last things that we can touch upon here, and I think is like super important, also from the analytical testing perspective. And you mentioned Chorus compliance was effectively born from labs,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting. We talked a little bit about sampling bias. What are some of the issues, I guess, that we've seen as it pertains to sampling bias with these cannabis products hitting the market?
So if anyone's listening who's not familiar, that basically just means that people who are submitting samples to be tested can select which samples they're sending in. So of course that raises a lot of questions. Are you spraying with pesticides but avoiding one area and plucking your sample from the area that hasn't been sprayed? So it can introduce bias on the side of the people who are submitting the samples. And I think the same thing can be said of potency inflation. You're submitting your samples to get tested for THC levels, and they may over-index, but they may not be indicative of what the whole entire batch looks like.
Okay, so currently folks in those markets are able just to select their own samples. That's interesting. There is very described procedures for how sampling has to occur. Certainly in some other mature markets, Canada is an example. Health Canada has prescribed regulations on how sampling has to occur with representative samples. This all has to be caught on camera as well, with mixing and separating until they get something that can be determined to be homogeneous. Other jurisdictions, especially in hemp testing, will actually send representatives from the lab to perform the testing themselves. Why is it that the DCC went with that I guess strategy that's prone to abuse?
Well, I can't really speak to what their thought process was in putting this together, but it probably is related to what we were talking about earlier, Lucas, that there's always an important aspect to like establishing a relationship with the legacy market. So I think there's a tension, right, between being friendly to operators and wanting them to feel like there's an established relationship with the people that will eventually oversee their operations, and then also wanting to be as stringent as possible on the testing side. So I think as we grow and mature, we'll start to find the middle ground that works for both interests.
One of the interesting points that came up in our session on Monday when we were chatting about this was cannabis and health and wellness products. I'm just curious if you're able to comment on that. You know, we didn't hear too much on that sort of earlier on, and I'm just wondering, you know, what are the kinds of products that people are looking for?
I'm really happy that you brought this up, and seeing the presentations from Mike and from Robin earlier were really interesting, and also back up some of the earlier research that I've done in my previous work with ISA, that people who tend to fall into that wellness category, which we know now is about half the market, they're using it for both wellness and for recreation. They're shopping in the legal market. They're driven by desire to help them sleep or to ease social anxiety. Pain management is another big thing, and this category is growing really rapidly. The negative side of having such strict regulations on making claims about health benefits is that people who are seeking the therapeutic benefits don't always know whether they can trust what's on the label, or that what they're reading is really a reflection of what the experience will be or what the benefits are. So I think as marketers in cannabis, our hands are tied a lot of times because we can't make health benefits claims, and we can't say that it'll help you, it'll be therapeutic benefits against certain diseases. And we've had companies like CannaCraft that had to pay $500,000 in a lawsuit because they made health claims on their website, and it was a class action lawsuit brought against them. So people are understandably wary about what to promote. They're also wary about what bud tenders are allowed to say. In Denver, there were stings. People came in undercover and asked bud tenders for medical advice, and they got in big trouble for handing it out. So from the consumer standpoint, they're really in a bad position. They don't know what sources to trust. They don't even know if they can trust what's on the label. And they are the ones who are really driving the market because they have a need for these benefits.
I'm getting the proverbial shepherd's hook here to wrap things up. But just before we do, Adriana, if people want to learn more about Chorus Compliance or get in touch with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Please visit our website, chorus.cc, or you can email me. I will drop my email in the chat right now, and feel free to reach out. And thanks for letting me take over and be very rambly.
Not at all. We really appreciate you having you. And like clockwork, Arundhati's here to take over the session. So again, thank you very much, Adriana. And yeah, great panel. Thanks for organizing very, very much, Arundhati. And floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lucas. That was amazing. And thank you, Adriana. Thank you so much. That concludes our session on regulatory trends and market structures. That was moderated by Dr. Lucas McCann. Thank you. We now move on to the next session, which is navigating the gray markets. And to begin, we have a presentation by Dr. Ruth Fisher, who's the co-founder of